Hello, everyone, and welcome. If you could please take your seats, we're going to begin. Firstly, if everyone could take their seats, we're going to begin. I wanted to welcome you all. Please come and have a seat. So a couple things. If you're using your apps today, you can ask questions through the app. There will be polling, so those of you that are very savvy in that, you're probably very aware of that, but the polling is new. We haven't done it throughout the conference yet, so we're going to do that in this session. Pretty excited about this particular session. It's going to run twice, so if you're really excited about what we talk about today or in the next hour and a bit, then you can sit in it again if you want. Of course, we encourage you to go over to the Merck Cattle Facilities Handling session. And then, of course, after those two sessions, we'll head back to the hotels. And then from the hotels, there'll be shuttles this evening that will be going to the Bull and Barrel. So with that, I'm going to introduce our MC for this afternoon. And we have the General Manager from the Canadian Hereford Association, Stephen Scott.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you guys all for coming out today. This will be a pretty interesting discussion, and it's meant to be an open discussion. We've got some few questions that we're trying to work ourselves through to get some interesting answers out of our panel here. The first thing I want to ask you guys to do is, how many people have the app? We've got a few. So what we're going to do is we want to get some feedback from you guys a couple different times during this chat. And so if you can go into your app and hit the drop down on the top left corner, scroll all the way to the bottom, and there's a global trends of cattle confirmation number 2. And the question should read, which heifer did you place first? If you could answer that for us, that would give us some time here to go through some other housekeeping items. And I'll just start here by introducing the panel that has been selected here to discuss with you guys on phenotype and genotype and to just kind of break down what they're looking at. So first we have Jack Oates. Jack is from Cobden, Ontario, where he operates a purebred Charolais and Simmental operation with his father. At a young age, Jack has had many successes in livestock judging. Jack has been a member of a nationally competitive judging teams at Blinn College in Texas, as well as the Kansas State University, while studying for his Bachelor of Science in Animal Science. Jack is now residing in Illinois, where he coaches the collegiate livestock judging team at the University of Illinois, and is continuing his studies in a master's degree in ruminant nutrition. Welcome, Jack. The farthest away is a gentleman from Africa originally, P.J. Butler, raised on a 5th-generation cattle farm in South Africa where he founded Bon Haven Beef Cattle at a young age. Bon Haven had great success in achieving the highest average sale prices and many successes in the show ring. In 2012, P.J. and his wife Kula moved to Fort Worth, where he established the cattlemarket.net and champion of the world competitions, which this year will incorporate over 14 different breeds. PJ is also a well-traveled judge with a global perspective, traveling to over 71 countries in his career thus far. PJ has recently joined Transova as the International Business Development Manager. Welcome, PJ. And finally on our panel, we have Dr. Dan Scheik. Dan and his wife Jennifer and their 2 children live in Illinois, where they operate Scheik Cattle Company along with his father and brother. Now an assistant professor at the University of Illinois, responsible for teaching and research in beef cattle nutrition and management, Dr. Scheik is in his 10th year of coaching the livestock judging team there at the university as well. Dr. Scheik's judging career started out under the guidance of Dan Hodge and Lee Denz at Black Hawk College, as well as he was a member of the champion judging team coached by Dr. Scott Shockey at Kansas State. Dr. Scheik has a long resume of experience judging the most notable cattle shows across the U.S. So welcome to Dan. Now, do we have the results from our poll of the audience? Pardon? Oh, okay, we're still waiting. Well, the boys will come up. I'll kind of go through what we're going to do this afternoon. We're just going to talk, the first thing we're going to talk about is is literally just the phenotype of these animals. And I think the history of judging cattle goes way back hundreds of years, just to go out and purchase the next set of breeding stock for your farm. So we wanted to start at a very basic level, not give you any information on these cattle, and then kind of work in the technologies that we have available today and discuss, what is for the next 10 or 15 or 20 years, how we move forward in the phenotypic evaluation of cattle and how we can introduce technologies into that. So with that, I'm going to give it over to Dan to give us a breakdown of the Is everybody turned in placings now? We're good, Rob? Perfect. Perfect.
Now, can you hear me? Okay. So this class here, first we're just going to go through and tell you how each of us liked them, I guess, from a phenotypic standpoint, and then we're going to share with you some EPDs, and we'll revisit the placings on that. I guess we thought it was a really nice class, and certainly appreciate these cattle being brought in, and gives us a nice opportunity to talk about some of the differences. I guess for me, I thought that it was pretty easy to find the one heifer. That's a heifer that, no matter what you're kind of looking for, hopefully you like that one. If you like them performance-oriented with some size and some volume, some natural thickness, I think she does that very well. I think she's also the balanced one that's good on her feet and legs. She gets out and moves nice, maintains her balance and her top line real correctly. I think at the other end of the class, probably need to find the 3 heifer. That was a heifer that, to me, is just pretty off in her balance. You just get off to the side and study her. She's a little deeper chested. She gets a little up in her flank, and then you study her out there, hooks to pins. That one's a little steep out of her hip and just doesn't balance up. I think also when you get in behind her, she's a little narrower, a little lighter muscled. I guess that leaves the 2 and the 4 heifer in the middle pair there, and they're certainly pretty different in their type and kind. The 2 heifer's the other January heifer that certainly has the size and performance. I think she has some muscle, a heifer that's reasonably good on her feet. I think when you get off and look at her, and you can see on the video there too, she doesn't balance up as well. She's a little easy in her top line, maybe a little high about her tail head. And I don't think her just body depth and body shape is as good as, for sure, like the 1 heifer. Then you have the 4 heifer, kind of the other end of the spectrum, real moderate, easy flesh and big-bodied heifer. She's one that, for me, is a little on the small side, and I'm probably most critical of her feet. She's shallow-heeled, and I think she just needs to have a little different foot design. But I really like her balance. She's correct in her top line. Certainly, that fleshing ability is of value. It's a close placing, and to me, it would really depend on what the goals of your operation are. Are you trying to raise, commercial bulls? Or are you trying to raise show heifers? There's give and take either way there. I prefer the 2 heifer over the 4 heifer in the middle.
For me, Dr. Shaik and I had them placed the same way, and I think that the reasons he gave would be very similar to what I liked about them. The first heifer is a big heifer. She's got some performance and growth in her, but she's a really good big heifer. She's got the balance and the foot quality, and she's really sound on her feet and legs, and she's got some natural thickness to her. And what I like about her is she's got some softness through her middle. She's soft over her rib cage, and she's got some belly, which we'll comment on later when we get to the EPDs. I think these maternal cattle need to maintain that softness, and that's what I really like about her. The heifer in second, same heifer as Dan had. Decent structured heifer. She's good on her feet and legs. She moves out really well. I'd like her stronger in her loin and her to carry that her spine better. And she is a little high in her tail head as well, and that tends to narrow the pins. I'd also like her to be a little softer through her middle. She gets a little hard through her ribs and a little tight in her gut and in her flank. But structurally, she fills in that second place naturally and quite well for me. The third place heifer, the moderate-framed, early maturing heifer in the group, she's got a very different maturity pattern to the others. She's easy fleshing. So her frame, although it's not ideal for what we're looking for today, there certainly are places in the world that can use that frame and body type. And that's not the big issue for me. For me, I need better feet on her. She's got, her toes are getting long, and like Dr. Shaik said, she's getting a little shallow-heeled. Another issue for me is her hair quality. It's August, and these cattle should be slick. And for me, it's a sign that her pituitary gland isn't working well. Her hormones aren't balanced yet, and she won't be cycling like she needs to be, or she wouldn't be at this stage. So her fertility is subfertile at the moment. And that's a more serious issue than anything else for me. Her depth of body and softness and ease of fleshing is a plus. The last heifer for me, it's balance. Her hormones aren't balanced correctly. She's very deep in her chest, and she's heavy over her chine and in her neck. She's got a kettle neck to her, and then she gets all tight in her flank and narrow through her pins. We just need to balance those hormones better for her to compete in this class, and that's the way I saw those four.
All right, guys. Well, like both of these gentlemen said, made some great points, and I'd like to reiterate what Dr. Shaik said of Brad Gilchrist bringing a great set of heifers out for us to evaluate. That's no small task to bring them to town here. But like I mentioned, 4 really nice cattle, and all of them definitely have value and quality, and all of them certainly will have a place in the beef industry. But again, I really like the one heifer to begin the class. I think that one, like Dr. Shaik mentioned, just suits it all. Whether your goal is growth-oriented, power-type cattle that have some length of spine and dimension to them, I think she fits that really well. I call that heifer one of the soundest in terms of her feet and leg structure, quite good in the shape of her feet, and just the way she travels the pen there is quite good. And then she's also got just a balanced and feminine look to her, and that's what kind of set her over the edge for me and what made me really attracted to her and go ahead and begin the class with her. On the other side of things, I think the 3 heifer was the one that just kind of fell out in my opinion. Certainly one that's, she's got some body and, some fleshing ease. She's relatively sound structured. She's not going to, just put you out of business by any means, but certainly a female that gives up in terms of balance and just overall quality. It's the deeper chested, kind of lower fronted heifer that, again, just got a little extra set to her hind leg and maybe doesn't balance up quite as well from her hooks to her pins. But certainly a heifer that just has some real-world functionality and would certainly make a nice replacement. And then in my opinion, the real decision was in the middle pair. And, I think the 2 heifer, like was stated just a bit earlier, that's the one that's, extra power and performance, a lot of length of side, and certainly one that's got a lot of top shape and dimension from behind. At the same note, though, she's one that gets a little too easy in her top line and perhaps just gets a bit up in her tail head. I'd like to see her softened up in her middle just a little bit there back to her flank, clean her up in her navel, but really a power-type female who's got a distinct advantage there in terms of her foot shape. And then the 4 heifer is one that's really moderate in her frame and bold in her rib. Really like those things about her, just her fleshing ease. At the same point, we can probably pick on that one at the ground just a little bit in the shape of her feet. She just gets a little bit, long-toed and shallow-heeled, but certainly one that you have to appreciate for her fleshing ease, and I think she's constructed a little nicer out of her top line. So nice class of cattle. I like 1 pretty well. I think 3 falls out. You got a close decision there in the middle pair, and you could probably go either way. We were talking about cuts or splits just a bit earlier, and I'm not sure we're supposed to let the cat out of the bag on what that is, but close decision there. So
perfect. Whoa, this one's loud. It's working. Well, thank you, guys. I guess you've brought up a lot of interesting points and talked about a few things that I would see as economically relevant. You talked about fleshing ability and ability to walk and all these things. Now, we hear that in the show ring all the time. I guess I wanted you to touch on what in show cattle today do you see that is traits that we're breeding for in the show ring that are economically relevant, and what are some traits that are completely have nothing to do with the economics of beef production?
I'll go first. Well, I would hope that the basis of any operation would start on the traits that are economically relevant. And certainly, I've had this discussion plenty of times and get done judging a show, and you may hear someone say, seemed like every class winner or top few they were talking about things that aren't as economically relevant. And that often is the case. And here is how I always answer that. I would hope at a major show the top few animals would be pretty similar in your economically relevant traits. I would hope that they would all have enough performance, that they would all have enough fleshing ability, they would all be good in terms of their natural dimension and muscling, and that they would be good on their feet and legs. And when that happens and you have 2 or 3 that are all right there, we have to place them on something. And that's where the balance and the lines and some of those aesthetic things come into play. How economically relevant is a perfectly level top line? Not. But sometimes that's what ends up and decides a pair that way, or how smooth they blend and neck, shoulder, top line. That's probably not going to change the dollars of your operation unless you're selling show cattle, and then it is an economically relevant trait, assuming they have the basic fundamentals that are necessary for beef cattle production. So I would hope that the breeders and the judges are always starting with the basics, but I would also hope that our major shows there are several cattle that check the boxes on those most important traits, and then we got to sort them on something.
For me, cattle need to be able to eat, walk, and reproduce, and that's where you start when evaluating any type of breeding cattle. And then secondly, the 4 most important economic traits being fertility, longevity, adaptability, and efficiency, you've got to have phenotypic correlations that work, that work together within that animal that you're looking at. And when you base your decisions off those evaluations, I think the animals that you end up using are cattle that can work in a commercial environment, and good looking or eye-catching or pretty is a very subjective term. And I think sometimes my argument here is sometimes we need to retrain our minds to what pretty or good looking or aesthetically pleasing is. My soapbox or bugbear in the show heifer industry in the US is we've cleaned up these cattle's throats and chests too much, and they've lost that ability to function and do in a commercial or harsh environment. But at the same time, we've taught people to think that that's attractive, and I've even heard it being called feminine. Having a hard-doing front is not feminine because that animal is not fertile. She's subfertile. And she's certainly not going to be very productive in terms of how she raises calves. So it's a very subjective term, and I think we maybe need to try and retrain our eyes into what is pretty and what isn't pretty. And then the second show ring aspect that I had to learn coming to North America from Africa is the way in which this isn't a problem in Canada because you guys need hair. I mean, without hair, your cattle die. In Texas, we're trying to grow hair on everything, and cattle in Texas are not adaptable if they've got too much hair on them. And that's something also we need to be cautious on is not training our minds to appreciate something that isn't just not economically relevant, but it could be destructive.
Sure. Well, I think there's, the things we can evaluate in a show ring are obviously phenotypes, and that's what, present themselves in the ring, and that's how we evaluate the cattle as they come through. And as far as what is economically relevant about that, I would hope that majority of what we're looking at is relatively economically relevant. We talk about sound in their feet and leg structure and cattle that have some dimension and performance and muscularity to them. All of those things are going to help drive the bottom line here in the beef industry, whether it be cattle that are efficient in terms of their growth and performance, and like I mentioned, muscularity and all those things. So I hope that many of the things that we evaluate as far as the basics do drive the economics of the beef industry. And then, I would argue that, much like PJ just said, the hair on cattle, it can be criticized. People say, well, these show cattle, they're too primped and pretty, and they spend too much time, just perfecting their look in terms of their hair and skin quality. And well, yeah, that may be the truth, that people work very hard to perfect those things. I think that still can be economically relevant. I think we look at a lot of the Canadian cattle that we have that have extra hair to them and just have an extra look of durability. I think that's something that's valued pretty worldwide. Specifically, in my experiences in the United States, people talk about for those cattle, whether it just be, stocker cattle that are coming down into the feedlots down there. They say, boy, those Canadian cattle, they're so rugged and hardy, and they've got such a powerful look to them, and they perform in most all environments, specifically some of the colder weather, and so that can certainly be economically relevant as well. And so I hope that a lot of the things that we're evaluating in the show ring are economically relevant. Mind you, there are some things, whether it be balance and just the way cattle look up through the front 1/3, or like Dr. Scheich mentioned, a perfect top line that perhaps isn't so much economically relevant. But at the end of the day, when there are cattle that check all the other boxes, you probably have to place them off of something, and that's what we find value in as judges.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. So just to give you insight into what your results were on the voting side, there was 39% of the voters said they chose number 1 as their top pick of the heifers. So I think a lot of agreement in the room as to the top animal. Now, I guess what the next question I want the panel to comment on, as maybe Jill is passing out kind of the next piece of information that we wanted to supply to you guys, is how do you use EPDs or genomic information? Brad has tested these 4 heifers with the I50K chip, and so they have genomic results, and these EPDs are genomically enhanced. So how do you guys, as judges in the show ring, use that information when you're making phenotypic selection?
Well, I spend a lot of time both looking at cattle phenotypically and studying data, and I find tremendous value in both. I know that there are some people that find no value in the genetic information, and there are some people that find limited value in the phenotypic, and I would argue that they're both being a little too close-minded. And if you're going to truly make cattle better, you need to study the phenotype and whatever available information, genetic information you have. And so how do you go about that? If I have a producer that asks me that, the first thing I do is really try and challenge them to tell me about their operation. What are your goals? What are you trying to do? How do you make money? Who are your customers? And what are your customers telling you that they need out of your cattle? And that should help guide that discussion on how much emphasis to put on the genetic information and which traits they need to work on the most. If most of your clientele are commercial bull buyers that need calving ease bulls, then you probably ought to try and generate some calving ease bulls. If your market is selling bulls as terminal sires, most of your clientele have mature cows, then you should probably worry less about birth weight and calving ease and focus more on growth and carcass traits. And so certainly we should never lose sight of those functional phenotypic traits we just talked about. I don't care how good their numbers are if they don't have good feet. A walking bull isn't going to do you any good if he can't go out and breed cows and last more than 1 breeding season. That's just not going to work for you. And likewise, doesn't matter how great the numbers are if the cow doesn't get pregnant and stay in the herd, and if she doesn't have any longevity, I don't really care how good her numbers are. So we have to keep in mind some of those functional traits, and we're keep adding more and more things to include in our genetic evaluation that are very important. Docility, and now some of the breeds are working on evaluation of feet and udder scoring, and some of those things that absolutely have value and really contribute to the longevity of cattle in operation. So it's always a balance, and the balance really depends on the operation. And so you have to self-evaluate your operation, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and who are your clientele and customer base to really figure out how you should strike that balance.
Yeah, I think Dr. Scheich really summed that up really well. For me, I want to congratulate the breeder who brought those 4 heifers, because the phenotypes and the genotypes match very well. What we see on paper, we actually do see in those 4 females. Personally, I judge cattle based on phenotype, and I'll use the numbers in the commentary. Unless there's a bull with like absolutely no milk or crazy high birth weight, which usually you see, phenotypically, and then same with the females. If there's a heifer that's showing us no milk, it'll probably affect a place or two, but usually with them too, you see you see the body type and the conformation and hormonal balance and the way they're structured. I think 2 points here. When you analyze all this, the data that we've been given, the milk numbers are very different. And I think that's one of the big issues is matching milk numbers to environment, and that comes into commentary when you're evaluating cattle. And the second thing, which I like to see on all 4 of these females in a maternal breed, is they're positive on fat. Now, in North America, most associations will penalize positive fat when they're publishing trait leader lists and all that. I think it's essential that we keep the fat in our maternal cattle. If you look at the ribeye numbers, there's enough muscle to balance that fat here too. And I mean, we don't want them fat with no muscle, but we need some kind of a balance there. If we make them too lean, we're gonna lose what we've got.
Good. Well, I'm really glad we got presented with this piece of paper, because what I think it does is offers us a lot more information than what we can just study with our naked eye. I think these EPDs are a very, very valuable tool. I think they are something that can definitely aid in our selection practices and how we can select cattle to suit different environments, and how we can select cattle that are bred to do different things, whether it be producing those phenomenal terminal cattle, or perhaps you're using them on heifers and you want an animal with a very good calving ease or birth weight, things of those nature. And so what these are, I think, are just a phenomenal tool that allow us to make a more informed decision. And we have EPDs here, but what's really nice about them is the fact that Brad's gone ahead and provided us genomically enhanced EPDs, which should provide us with even more confidence in what these numbers are. And so as we look at the paper here, I think, for example, heifer number 1, that was really popular for us, and by the sounds of it, you folks in the crowd as well. You study her genotype here, and she's in the top 1% of the breed for whether it be weaning weight, yearling weight, total maternal carcass weight. She's a breed leader in several different areas, and that's phenomenal that we can have an animal that looks as good as she does on the hoof, but then also has value built in here as well, that we can be confident what we're seeing is real. And so I really like the fact that these genomically enhanced EPDs provide us a little more confidence and another tool in our toolbox. I think what's important is that we've evaluated their phenotype first of all, and I think we need to do that primarily at all points. I think certainly if they don't cut it and they're not structurally sound, it doesn't matter what this piece of paper says. But now that they are good enough, we can go ahead and read into this and find the extra value in these cattle.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. So now I'd like to put it back on the audience, too. There's a second question on the app, which is the number 1 question, and it is, did your placings change after you saw the EPDs? So I'd love to get your feedback on if your placing that you submitted just before has changed based on what you've been given now. And I'll hand it back to Dr. Scheik for a final comment on the EPDs.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. There's a few shows in the U.S. where they are including the EPDs. Simmental Association, most of their national shows now have EPDs included in that. And I guess as a judge at a show, the way I work through that, and not everyone would do it the same, on the female side of things, I probably am a little more forgiving. I want those females to be breed average or better, but I'm not out there trying to find the most elite EPD one now, because they're going to have one calf each year, and I can AI them to a trait-leading bull and make a big move. Now, if we're talking about the bulls, obviously they're going to impact a lot of progeny, and I would hope we don't need as many bulls out there. I hope that we're all using bulls that are in that upper percentile, because we can put more sort on them. So I'm probably more critical of the numbers on the bull side, and probably will let the females, as long as they're the phenotype I want, drift a little closer to breed average and not have to hold the bar quite as high. But that's mine personal.
Thank you very much. And we'll wait a minute or two for more to come in. Oh. Yeah. Yeah, so there was, 76% of people said that they would change their results. So it's, pretty significant, I think, adding any layers of information to all these decisions you make, whether it's breeding cattle out on pasture. We're talking about genomics, and we do that day to day at an association as we just try to add layers of data to help decision-making processes. So I think from these judges here, we're hearing that those layers of information makes their job easier too, and gives them an added insight into the situation. So I guess one more question, and then I'll probably open it up for a couple minutes because we're doing good for time. So I just wanted to ask you guys, should shows or sales or associations putting on consignment shows or sales be pre-selecting animals based on a genetic merit or a breeding value or something to, push the breed forward? Is that something you think is of value to the individual breed, or welcome your comments?
I believe that they shouldn't, and the reason is that why would a committee on a show or an association running an event want to run at risk of being wrong? You put minimum weights and maximum weights and minimum heights and maximum heights in order to enter the ring in the first place. What if you're wrong? What if you're going to be proven wrong in 10 years' time like the 50s and 60s were proven wrong? What if you're going to be proven wrong like the 80s and 90s were proven wrong? And same with birth weights and what's going to happen with carcass as I predict. I think let the market decide what's good or not, and on the day at a sale, the market is the buyer, and at a show, the market is the judge. And eventually it figures itself out where the cattle that aren't accepted by the market aren't being brought to market anymore. And then the burden's off you because I wouldn't want to be the one held responsible for sending those cattle to frame 9 and 10 in the 80s and 90s. So there are breeds in the US, like the Brahman breed, for example, where to get into the ring in Houston, which is the premier show, you've got to be a certain height and weight, minimum and maximum. I think they're running a big risk of being wrong because the trends internationally are a little different to what they're trying to stipulate. And the same with sales. If you think something's maybe not big enough or too big, or the numbers aren't right, they might be right for 10% of the population that are there to buy a bull. I think let them decide what's right or wrong.
Yeah, I think PJ makes some great points there, and I think what's to say that the association should perhaps decide what's right for individual people. I think that as breeders, you should make that decision yourself, and what works in your particular environment and what works in your program. I think that's something you can make a decision for yourself with your own dollars when you purchase those animals. And so certainly I wouldn't restrict based on those things. And I find it interesting that you brought up the 50s and the 60s and the frame debate there, and then we get to the 80s and 90s where obviously I wasn't around during those times, but who's to think that the people at that time, they probably thought they were doing the right thing. I'm sure that at that time that was what was in demand, and they thought, boy, beef production just can't get any better than this. Well, what's to say that we're in one of those trends right now? We'll see in 10 or 15 years just how right we are in this particular day and age, I guess.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add other than let the breeders be breeders. I'd say some of the most influential and probably economically successful breeders might have been mocked at some point in time for having cattle that fit outside of the current norm, and then they look pretty smart later. Let's let them be breeders. We don't know, and I mean I fear that we are making cattle too similar in the U.S. and all of our breeds, and if we do need to make a change, I fear that those cattle may not be there because of the use of AI and embryo transfer and IVF. I mean, the same genetics are everywhere, and I think a little diversity is okay. You never know where we might need to go 20 years from now, so let the breeders be breeders.
There's a mic in the middle of the room there. Is there any questions from the audience at this point for our panel of judges? Bruce Holmquist, come to the mic. We all want to hear it.
Yes, now I'm nervous.
Is it on? Don't worry, PJ. I'm a fan today. Just one thing that I'd like to point out, and there are some gray-haired folks here like myself, it wasn't breed associations that drove the 50s, 60s, 80s, 90s change. Those are committees of livestock shows made up of breeders. And I'm going to duck the breed association's neck out of the noose on that one. We make lots of mistakes. We didn't make that one. and largely, and it's not a criticism, but just a comment of how or who did that. There was a lot of folks that trained some of you guys that came up here and said, this is what we need. And we ended up with some very refined females, just like you said, PJ. You know, how far do we take the refinement? And I've been a Simmental breeder for a long time. And, you know, I had a chat with an Angus breeder about 2 months ago about the dirty fronted Simmentals in Canada. Well, guess what? They saved the day for our breed. That extra leather on them, not to be confused with masculinity on the females, but that extra leather added a genetic base that we could go to get some softness and looseness into that animals, into our cattle. But the one question I have, PJ, is can you clarify what adaptability is? You know, I understand your other 3 points, but I just want that one.
So for me, I'll use extremes because often extremes make the point a lot better. So for example, if you're on the Gulf Coast of Texas or in southern Florida, it's cattle that can be run on a commercial basis, that can breed, rebreed, and grow to the right age cow naturally. So for example, a Brahman animal or red Brangus animal in that area or Beefmaster is adapted to that environment, okay? You can't bring those cattle to Canada because they don't grow the hair, they haven't got the bone, they just don't have the body type to survive up here. Now that adaptability is, what I mean too there is adaptability to markets. So what you guys did in Canada with the Simmental and the Charolais and the Limousin breeds is you adapted the body type and the phenotype to the Canadian market, and that's why they're still around today. Because if you hadn't adapted them, there wouldn't be any left. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was confused. I thought they meant adaptability of the animals within the breed, but you're talking between.
No. I'm talking about breed adaptability. So if I'm judging a show in Chihuahua, Mexico, and an Angus heifer comes in August with hair like that, she's bottom of the class. If I'm judging a show in Canada in November, and an Angus heifer comes in the class and she's got no hair on her, she's going to get knocked hard for that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Good job, guys.
My name's Colin Campbell. I'm from Alberta. This class here, I probably was trained a little different than you are. There's a couple decades difference in between us in age. You have the number 4 heifer in the middle of 3 heifers that basically, yes, they're a little out of balance and they got a little different phenotypes, but you're talking about having an outlier in the middle of a class. How does that shake up things? Like she should, in the way I was taught, she'd either be first or last, and you have her in the number 3 spot.
I'd be glad to comment on that. And there are still some, and you'll see it at the shows, some people that are very adamant about having a certain type. I probably have been criticized sometimes for being willing to switch types. And part of that for me is because my background is of various different breeds, and from show cattle to seed stock operations, raising bulls for commercial producers, to just a commercial cow-calf. And so I see cattle of different shapes and sizes that have value. I don't think they have to be a one-size-fits-all. And so for me, I'm always just trying to find the ones that I think are the best and then the next best. And sometimes they don't look the same. In a perfect world, I would love to just be able to use the same type. And you're absolutely right. The 4 heifer is the different one. And I could see where you're coming from on that. I guess for me, when I'm looking at a class and placing them, Of course, if you can follow type, great, but I'm more interested in just putting them where I think they fall in terms of their potential value.
I don't mean to be argumentative, but as a breeder, when you're breeding, everybody knows here, they can take a bull and put it into a set of three-quarter sisters, and you got a plethora of differences in the progeny. So all of a sudden, you're saying that I should take that animal and use her and expect to have uniformity in my cow herd? Because as breeders, most guys are striving for uniformity.
And so my follow-up comment to that would be back to my first comment on deciding where to put for. It would totally depend on your operation. For some if you told me what your operation was and where you were located and who your clientele were and what you're trying to market, I would then be more confident in where she should go.
But that goes to PJ's comments about adaptability. You're not going to put a frame 7 cow into an environment that can only support a frame 4, and vice versa.
So if I can make a brief comment on that, I believe, and I wasn't trained, I'm not technically trained in cattle judging like these guys are. Like, I'm a bit of a hack. But what I believe is that the best animal in the class needs to be first, and the second best needs to be second, and the third best needs to be third, fourth, all the way to 15 or 20 or however in the class. And the reason I believe that is when you're judging a national show or international show, they're cattle coming from so many different climates and so many different weather patterns and nutritional, the ability to put solid nutrition into them and different nutritional values are so different that when it comes to evaluating them, it's got to just be on quality. I don't know who said this, but I use this a lot, and I use it as though I made it up, which I didn't. I've plagiarized it, but I can't remember who the source was that quality cattle come in all shapes and sizes. It's very easy to make a big one and a little one. It's difficult to make a good one. And when you judge, I think you need to use the good ones in order. Whoever said that can come and get royalties when he's ready, because I've used it a lot.
I would probably agree with both Dan and Dr. Scheich's comments. I just think, as a judge, you probably have an ideal in your mind of what your ideal animal is, whether it be an ideal heifer or a bull, and maybe you have an animal that falls a little bit one way of your ideal as compared to the animal in second who's a little more the other way, but you still have to find the value in both of those different populations of cattle. So.
Hello, I'm Elgin Craig, and I come from a dairy world, and now I've entered into the beef world. And I need some explanation here, because loin strength in dairy cattle was forgiven for years, and it had an adverse effect on reproductive. One of the other things is loin strength and thorough location of the rear legs, and the set of those rear legs has so much to do with loin strength and the pin setting. And when I see an animal that's weak in her loin, especially since we're going into cow-calf, I really discount that one. And for me, I guess number 4 for me was an easy one, because she had some feet problems. She had a very big set to her feet and legs. She got her pins up in the air, and I just need some education of how to, when I see a cow or a heifer like number 3 that had loin strength, how you can get her way down. I know she's an outlier, but I need some education on that.
So, do you want to take that? I mean, so, and this is something that gets thrown at me twice a month when I judge shows. They say, how did you use that animal to be second in that class or reserve champion in that division, and it's got this problem and that problem and that problem? And I agree. But look what was down the line. So it's not like we had rock stars to beat her in the class. So I agree on loin strength a lot. I think the issues we had below her, the animal with the weak loin, were serious hormonal and structural issues that I don't think you can get around. So I don't know if that makes sense or not. Like, I agree with you on loin strength. We've got to have strong loins on these cattle, but what we had below there is the heifer that you were promoting, the heifer number 3. Yeah, you see, your hormones aren't balanced. So, and as a dairy farmer, this should be incredibly important to you because dairy cattle are subfertile. And this cow, unfortunately, is going to be subfertile because she's heavy-fronted. You know?
Can you explain this hormonal thing? I don't understand that at all. When you look at an animal and you talk about her hormones.
Yeah. So basically, in nature, in mammals, males, if you look at wild animal populations, the males are masculine and the females are feminine. And they have a progressive wedge. You know, the females are smoother shouldered and wider at the hips, bold through their middle. The males get bolder shouldered and bigger necked and more coarse in their head, and they wedge slightly the other way. So when you have a wedge like the number 4 female's got, where she's deep chested and she's heavy fronted, but she's very narrow pinned and tight flanked, her hormonal balance is wrong. And if you wouldn't find a female like that in the wild, you just wouldn't. And it's because nature she wouldn't rebreed, she wouldn't be there. Yeah, it has. It's an old science from 60s, 50s, and before that. What has departed us from that science is maybe the use of data and numbers to analyze animals where we maybe have gone past that. But anyone who evaluates cattle phenotypically will know that females need to be feminine and ladylike, and men and bulls need to be masculine, because the testosterone in the bulls gets their necks bolder, gets their head to have more grunt, it gets the shoulders to have more strength, and the estrogen in the female wedges them the other way. So I think it's very important to understand what's inside the cattle as well as what's on the outside of the cattle.
I have a question from the app here. So if you want to submit questions through the app, please do so, and I'll be able to read them here at the mic. And of course, if you do come up to the mic, introduce yourself. So this one obviously is from someone in the crowd. This question was directed to PJ. How does Canada stack up in the ability to use GEPDs and phenotype? Have we struck a balance? Are we underusing it or overusing it in comparison to the rest of the world?
Well, I think just what's happening globally now, where a lot of breeders from around the world are coming to Canada to get their British and European genetics, is testimony to that whatever you're doing balance-wise is correct. And I think my understanding of it is that you haven't chased any fad too hard you haven't chased single traits hard in any direction. So you use data, but within context. You use phenotype, but within context. You want growth in your cattle, but to a limit. You want your females to be refined, but you limit that. And I think that caution and the thoughtfulness and the honesty in which you're producing cattle is why today the world is going to Canada to find their genetics.
Just a small point there to make on top of PJ's response there. I think, as Canadians, we've certainly been good in our balanced approach to breeding cattle. I think you visit some other areas of the world, perhaps, and maybe they're chasing a bit more extremes here or there, or something like that. And I think it's really nice and refreshing that we just kind of, don't chase those extremes. And I think a balanced approach is always, I think, preferred. And that allows you to have that consistent base there from which to kind of make the next generation. So.
I guess we don't have any more questions from the crowd at the moment. I've got a question for the panel. And I think today we see, the moderation of cattle size in general in the show cattle population, but we see increasing carcass sizes. So how do those two relate in industry? Is that just diversion between the two sides, but commercial versus purebred, or how do you guys see that relating?
Well, I think you got a couple things happening there. And so, unlike Jack, I was around in the 80s and the 90s, and when I first started showing cattle and going around them, they were big. I could not see over them. They were They were big framed. They were hard doing. They had no belly. And pretty much since then, we've been adding more body to them. And we've talked about this. I think, and I said this a few shows I've judged recently, I think we've gone too far on depth of body. I think there becomes a point where it's just waste. I mean, I love easy flesh and good bodied cattle, but I think we can go too far. But where I'm going with that is we have moderated frame size, but they still weigh a lot. And so I think if you look at the U.S. Angus database, yes, mature height has come down. Mature weight has just kind of held constant. So, I mean, these cattle still weigh a lot. And then the other thing that kind of goes, that actually would say that it's maybe not as contradictory as it seems, we have made cattle grow fast, early, and then shut down, which is what we want them to do. We have added, I mean, the yearling weight trend line in the U.S. at least is still going like this. But the mature weight has broke. And that's because we are finding those kind of curve benders, those outliers, those ones that come small, grow fast, and then shut down. And so we can keep adding carcass weight without adding mature weight. And I think that's what we want to do. And I think that makes the most sense, from an economic relevance.
Moderate frame cattle is a very subjective term. When you get into a show, often an animal that might seem moderate within that contemporary group at the show wins the class, especially in the senior classes. It's very subjective. I'll maintain she's still a lot bigger than the average commercial cow out there. So I don't know. I mean, we have moderated height, but I don't think we've moderated weight. And at the end of the day, the show cattle are probably still too big.
I would definitely agree with that. There's and at the end of the day, people that are there and showcasing their genetics are showcasing some of their very best, and they're bringing cattle that have that increased performance and increased growth, and so you do get some of those bigger and stouter, more muscular cattle, and have several different traits that they're good at. But I would agree there are a lot of big heavyweight cattle that are still moderate in terms of their frame. And I'm not here to say that there's any one animal that can do it all, but there's certainly, our cattle that, like Dr. Scheich mentioned just a moment ago, well, they grow fast to a year of age when you really want them to, or to market weight. And then in terms of mature size, they probably balance out a little bit more. So it's nice to see that we have cattle that can do that.
Sorry, this is off topic, but I just wanted to go back to the comment about the dairy cattle. And I didn't want to sound like, I don't think beef cattle people could ever tell dairy cattle people about genetics, because you guys have got it so much down to an art, and you understand data, and you're measuring everything all the time in large numbers, honestly and accurately. And I mean, we respect that a lot. On the other hand, though, the reason why the dairy cows, in my opinion, are subfertile is because the bulls are feminine. You look at a dairy bull, he's a feminine bull, and he's later maturing, and his scrotal circumference gets there at a much later age. That's 100% correlation in every other mammal species, including bovines. And my fear, and I work for a company that's big into dairy, my fear is that we're going to run into a wall and a lot of people are going to get a blood nose.
I want to add one more comment back to the size thing, and it goes back to something PJ said earlier. You need to match the size of your cows to your environment. We may have an optimum size specification we're trying to get in the feedlot, but we don't have to raise a 1,400-pound steer out of a 1,400-pound cow. All right? There are parts of the country that they need to raise that 1,400-pound steer out of a 1,200-pound cow, which means somebody needs to have a big bull for them. All right? And because I'm from the Midwest, Illinois and U.S., we get 40 inches of rain and we have 4 foot of black dirt. We grow a lot of grass and a lot of corn. We have a lot of feed. We run big cows. But in the desert in the U.S., they run much smaller cows, and they have to. And they have to be smaller cows with less milk potential, or they won't stay in the herd and they won't be pregnant. So they need to be able to AI to a big bull. So, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. We are so different than the swine or the poultry businesses. Those, and I know I'm using U.S. examples, but a pig barn in Minnesota is the same as a pig barn in North Carolina. They set it to the same temperature, they build it to the same specs, and they put the exact same genetics in there. and they grow at the same rate, and they kill at the same carcass data. Beef industry isn't that way, so we need to keep making different cattle, and some of them are big and some of them are small, and that's good.
And I think that probably is what kind of makes breeding cattle a bit of an art. Talk about cattle that can do those things. We talk about growing to a year of age and kind of shutting down and having that ideal mature size. Well, it takes certain cattle for different environments, and everyone has their own ideals, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And it takes all different kinds of outcrosses to produce, at the end of the day, our perfect product in beef. So definitely takes a lot of skill, in my opinion, to breed cattle.
Very good. Now, have we stirred up any more questions out there?
So I have another question off of the app. It says, on cattle that do not have a genetically enhanced EPD and have an accuracy of less than 20%, how true do you feel that these numbers actually are?
Did you guys get that?
Yeah, so the question was on a low accuracy EPD without genetic information. How accurate are they? Well, the 20% accuracy, I mean, you can, within the breed, you can see what the potential change is. And it's a pretty big window. If you're sitting down there at 10, 15% accuracy, the possible change is quite large. And we don't know. That's a risk you run. And so, again, I made that comment earlier about when I'm judging a heifer show and there's data on it, how much emphasis I put on that. And that was especially true prior to genomically enhanced EPDs. If we're talking about a low accuracy EPD on a yearling heifer, I'm not going to throw it out the window, but I'm sure not willing to sacrifice all the things that I can see for a possibility. And I'm a huge proponent of genetic information. But I think, again, you got to keep it all into context. And yes, a low accuracy EPD has limitations. It's better than nothing.
Yeah, certainly, like Dr. Scheich mentioned, definitely better than nothing, and it's another tool we can add to our toolbox. But I don't think we can forget about the actual phenotypes we see in front of us and evaluating that first and having trust in our eye as skilled cattle breeders to evaluate what's in front of us. And then we can go ahead and use that EPD for what it's worth and the accuracy that it presents, whether it be 20%. You can place about 20% value on that, perhaps, and it can certainly be a tool to work for you, but keep in mind that what you're seeing in front of you is the actual proof, I'd say.
And I think that the genotype has to point to the phenotype. If you've got an animal that is phenotypically representing a positive growth pattern and it's showing you some muscle, but then the EPDs are 20% accuracy and showing you something different, you've got to trust your eye on that. Because 20% accuracy is if someone in London, Ontario says that, ask me where I live, and I'll say, I live southwest of here. That's 20% accuracy. 50% accuracy is I'm in the US. 80% accuracy, I'm in Texas. 95% will get me in Fort Worth, and you have to find me once you get there. But at the end of the day, it points you in a direction, and the more you get that accuracy up, that's where you can actually find that, the actual value of that trait.
I would challenge everyone here, and I don't know, maybe we have a bunch of people that are believers in genetic information proponents, and maybe we have some that question it, but I believe as an industry, it absolutely is going to be part of the future, and we're going to have more and more information available, and we need to work to educate those producers that are going to be buying genetics from us. I think no matter where you're at, I'm sure it's the same here. There are people that question it because they see a bull that doesn't have good numbers, but he's big, or they see a bull that's small, and talking to them about contemporary groups and how two animals can have the same genetic potential, but you put them in different environments and their phenotype's going to look different, and that's why we get the cattle that don't match their numbers. I love it when they match, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's because the information's not very accurate. Sometimes just because they had a poor environment. And so this isn't going away. The genetic information is going to keep getting better. I truly believe that. And it's absolutely going to continue to be one of the tools we have to embrace and use if we're going to make cattle better.
And I agree with everything that Dr. Scheich said. As long as EPDs and genomically enhanced EPDs are used for selection purposes and not marketing purposes. Because what we're seeing south of the border and in other parts of the world is when you start equating a real dollar amount in terms of money to a dollar beef number, or that every breed's got its deal, that's a train wreck waiting to happen.
So that might raise an interesting question: is if you guys had a wish list, say pipe dream wish list, as to the data you could have when you walk into a ring to do phenotypic evaluation, what would that include?
Well, if I had a wish list, I mean, I would love to have information on the traits that have very low heritability and very low correlation to phenotypic traits. If you could tell me with certainty that this heifer is going to rebreed on time every year for the next 12 years, that would be awesome to know, because even though I fully believe what PJ was saying about there are things you can see, and it's still a bit of a guess on that. And if I knew exactly what their feed conversion was, I mean, that's one of my favorite questions: which animal looks the most efficient? And at the University of Illinois, we collect feed intake data on about 1,000 head a year, and I'm here to tell you, you cannot look at one and tell me which one is the most efficient and be right every time. You can be right sometimes, but I challenge anybody to be able to come in and rank those 1,000 head phenotypically on their feed efficiency. You can't do it. So I would like to have information on some of those traits that I'm not smart enough to be able to look at one and tell you that. And we know, as he listed, those are extremely relevant from an economic standpoint, and phenotype is not a good indicator.
Well, if I make a couple comments, I think that there's a lot of things that we can't see with our naked eye, and that's what EPDs provide us, an insight into what that animal has the potential to do. And but still, I think, like Dr. Scheich mentioned on the reproductive efficiency of cattle, I don't think you can just tell based on an animal walking in the ring that she will, in fact, be early to estrus and always rebreed very quickly. I think that's something that you just would never be able to ever to evaluate. And so I think if you could know something like that, along with feed efficiency, two of the major drivers of profitability here in the beef industry, that would be phenomenal to have. But I guess it's just not realistic at this point to understand all those things. Getting closer, though, like Dr. Scheich mentioned, with a lot of the new technologies that are present in today's world.
Well, that's great. I think that's really interesting for everyone to hear as we move forward. I think in Canada, probably we have a lack of data when we go to a show in general, I would say. And so it's really interesting to look forward as to, what the next 20 to 50 years might bring in a change like that. So is there any questions? You got a question, Joe?
This is more of a global question. What are your thoughts on associations putting in place policies that promote or discourage types of cattle that are allowed into their country based on EPDs? For example, semen from high accuracy bulls would only be allowed to be accepted into that country.
I mean, it's the same philosophy as I mentioned earlier. Like, let the market decide. I think that associations, and this is where the North American associations are more progressive than the rest of the world, is there is that free market mentality of bring them in, even if they're not high accuracy, even if they've got bad EPDs, bring them in. If a breeder thinks he can do something with it, let him do it. Let the market decide if it's good or not, or if it's wanted or not. I just think that putting that burden on yourself as an association to try and direct what type of cattle or what color of cattle or what size of cattle your breeders need to breed is it's a millstone you don't need around your neck. You've got enough on your plate.
That's great. Well, are there any questions? Anything else? Well, I just want to thank you guys. I think you've done a great job today. I think it's been an interesting conversation, and I think as we see the industry move forward in all sorts of technologies, we can introduce those into the oldest way we've always evaluated cattle and modernize that. So kind of a few takeaways I had from this afternoon was phenotypic evaluation can definitely be aided with the additional levels of information from genomics and more technologies that will come in the future. And as well, I think an interesting thing that came from today is, you know, even though there's only one winner on a show day, the variation in that pen of cattle that you judged is kind of important for those breeds, and that the variation kind of explains them going out and being able to provide in different environments and meet different needs. So I think that's an important take-home message as well. So I'd just like to thank these guys, give them a round of applause. They've done a great job and traveled far to be here. Thank you guys very much for attending.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Stephen for moderating our session and our speakers, so we have some gifts for them here. I just wanted to let you all know very quickly here that we have a break. We have some refreshments and some snacks over on the side. We're going to begin the next session in about 10 minutes. If you do need to get to the hotel, there is a bus just outside. You can go load that. Or if you'd like to stay with us, we'd encourage you to stay with us, and you'll take part in the next session here in about 10 to 15 minutes.